Welcome back, CSE 103, to part 2 of our exercise 17, Show Hide Patrick, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So far, we've done the HTML and CSS. And if you look at our sample here, this is what we have. This is our HTML. The CSS turned the background color blue. It changed this thing to kind of a pink color, which we can change. And we put a margin on it. And we also made Patrick a little bit smaller, and we turned his opacity down to 0.25, which eventually will put it down to 0, because if he's not there, we want his opacity at 0. But let's go back, and we're going to do some JavaScript, and we're going to do a function to make Patrick be 100%. So if you remember Python doing functions, we had a function definition, which basically said what the function's going to do. And it was usually something that was after a colon, and then it had the parts of it were indented. Well, in JavaScript, it's a little bit different. We're going to define our function like this. Instead of saying def, you remember, like, we would have a thing in Python that would be like def show pat. If we did it in Python, it would be like this, and then we'd hit tab, and then we'd have something happen here. Well, we're not going to do it like that. So let me backspace here. What we're going to do in JavaScript is have a function and give it the function keyword. So I'm going to put function, and you could click on function, and then you give your function a name. And just like draw triangle and things we were doing in Python, here we're going to call it showpat. And again, you're better off just doing lowercase and, you know, not putting dashes or underscores, things like that. Just keep it lowercase right now. And you are going to put an opening, closing parentheses after it. And I think we did that in Python too. I think we had parentheses there, and they were for arguments, but we're not going to put any arguments in here right now. Now, instead of a colon, like we did with Python, we're going to put a space and put curly braces, just like we do with CSS. So everything's going to go inside of curly braces. So I'm going to hit return, and it'll look just like CSS, so that we have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And then in here, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to turn Patrick into 100%. So what we do is we do something called document. Now just watch what I do. Document, and I'll type document dot, and then I'll start typing get, and you'll see get element by ID. Now there's different ways to get elements. You can get elements by tag name, by class name. You can query selections, but we're going to use get element by ID. That way you don't have to worry about how you type it, because notice it's camel case. It's a small g and then a capital E, a capital B, and a capital I. But just click on it. Then you don't have to worry about it. And in parentheses after it, we're going to put the ID name. And the ID name is going to be Patrick. So in quotes, you have to put quotes, put Patrick, because that's the ID name. And then after that, we're going to tell it what it's going to do. And we're going to put dot style, which means it's using CSS. So it's first telling to use CSS, meaning style. It doesn't use dot CSS, it uses dot style. And then we're going to put dot opacity, and there's opacity, and we're going to change it to 1. So I could just put equals 1, and then end these just like CSS with a semicolon, and that's it. That's your function definition. Now to run the function, I'm going to go after this. So we define the function, then I'm going to run it or call it, and I'll do document dot, and then put get. And I put GE, and get element by ID is coming up. So it's going to be just like this. So I'll put dot get element by ID. I'll select that. And this time, I'm going to use button 1. And in quotes, I'll put BTN1. And I'm keeping everything lowercase. And then I'm going to put dot add. Start typing add. And you'll see I just put an A, and add event listener came up here. Add event listener. And then in parentheses, we're going to put the event, which is going to be click. So I'll put click, and then I'll put a comma. I think it's a comma. And I'll put the function name, which is show pat. And you don't put the parentheses for pat, just like we have here. These are up here for arguments, but you don't put them here. You just put show pat. And I'm pretty sure you do use a comma here. And then just finish it off with a semicolon. And we're going to see if this works, because if this works, then it's very easy to copy it and do the other part. and change the text and also make Patrick disappear as well. So this should make him appear. So this is our function definition. This is our function call, which is activating the button using the click event. And showPat is the function that's going to run when we click the button. So we're contacting the button. We're saying, hey, listen for the click event and then run this function. So let's see if this works. I'm doing this out of my head. I think it's okay. I think there should be a comma there. And one thing you should do, because I was having issues when I first tried it out, make sure you just hit run here. Sometimes I say you don't have to hit run, but because it's JavaScript, let's run the JavaScript and then go up to here and refresh this. And it's not going to look any different, but what should happen when we click this button, Patrick should be 100%. And perfect, that works. And now what we can do is we can go back to our CSS, and instead of opacity 0.25, let's make it 0. So he starts off completely transparent. I just wanted to make sure it worked first. So let's make sure his opacity is 0. So I'll go back here, I'll refresh it, and now he's completely transparent, and now I'm showing Patrick. And now this button is going to do the hide Patrick. Now, if the first button worked, the second button is going to be really easy because you're just going to be copying the same JavaScript. So we're going to do our function definition, then our function call. So I'm going to copy this function definition after here and paste it. And instead of showPat, I'm going to call it hidePat. And it's still contacting the same ID. It's still contacting the Patrick ID. And instead of changing the opacity to 1, it's going to make it 0. So this is going to hide him. So the hidePat is going to make the opacity 0. The showPat is going to make the opacity 1. And that's all you need. Again, remember, after every statement in JavaScript, make sure you put a semicolon. Now, not after the function curly braces. This is basically a function definition inside the curly braces, but the function call does not have to be inside curly braces. So I need a function call. So I'll copy this one, and I'll put it here. And this is going to be button ID 2, because remember, we're contacting the second button, the hidePat button. And you could call it button hide. Maybe it would be more efficient to say button hide or something, but it's button 2. And then add event listener, click, and instead of showPat, this is going to be running the hidePat function. And be very careful to make sure this says the same thing as that. And this says the same thing as that. Exactly. You can't put a capital P here. It won't work like that. Make sure that's a small p. And that should work. So let's see what happens when we do this. I'm going to hit run here, and we'll just make sure everything's working okay. And now I'm going to refresh the page, which will make Patrick disappear. I'll hit show Patrick, hide Patrick, show, hide. Look how much fun that is. It's like a game. There it is. Show, hide, show, hide. But you're using JavaScript, so it's pretty cool. And what you can also do is when the page loads, it says, where's Patrick? But once you show Patrick, it should say, here's Patrick. And then go back, because now you see them, so it shouldn't say where's Patrick, because he's right there. So what you can do is put another statement here. So when you show Patrick, it's going to make a statement that says here's Patrick. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to go here and say document dot get, and in parentheses, well, I don't have an ID yet, because what am I contacting? Well, I have to go to my index. And I'm contacting this H2. Now, I could give this H2 an ID. So I'm going to give this H2 an ID and say H2, and then put an ID attribute, ID equals, and then in quotes, I'll just put message, because it's just a message. And make sure you finish off the quote, and it's inside the H2 tag, the opening H2 tag. So now we identified H2 with an ID called message. And we're not styling it at all, unless you want to. But now, when we go back to JavaScript, this ID is going to be message. And it does have to be in quotes. And now what we're going to do is something called inner HTML. And that's going to write HTML to a page. So I'm going to type dot inner. And I just typed I. and it came up, and it looks like this. It's inner with capital HTML. But don't bother typing it, just click on it, and .inner HTML, and then you could just put equals, and then in quotes, like a string, you could put whatever it's going to say. And what it's going to say, once you run the showPat function, it's going to say, here's Patrick. And then finish it off with a semicolon. And before we do the other one, make sure that this works. So I'll hit run. I'll come here, I'll refresh it, and I'll put show Patrick, and it says here's Patrick. Perfect. Now that that works, it's going to be really easy to do this one because I'm just going to copy this statement. And notice the statement is going inside the function definition because now two things are happening when you run the function. So I'll put this here, I'll paste it, and this time it's going to be document.getElementById message, and the inner HTML now is going to go back to where's Patrick, and I could put the question mark, and actually up here I'll put an exclamation mark because that will, you know, you're excited to see Patrick, so I'll put that, and that looks okay. So that's not a lot of code to do that. We just have two functions, function, and then function call, and we're testing it a little bit each time, so they're both working. And I'll hit run, and now we'll test out our page. Refresh it so that Patrick disappears. Show Patrick, it's making him 100%, and it's making that text say here's Patrick. And now when I hit the hide Patrick button, he's disappearing, and this is saying where's Patrick again. So that's it. That's exercise 17. When you're done, you can copy this. I know I always said, oh, you got to copy the one from the Replit. You can actually copy this. If you want to copy your web page, you could put that in My Warren in coursework for exercise 17. You know, link it just like you do all of your other ones. Insert link, put it there, make sure it opens in a new window. But you could use this too. So you could copy it right from here if you want. And that way I'll see your page right away and I'll see if it works. And again, if you have any problems, I'll go in your Repel and check it out. So if you have any issues with it, just send me the link. Don't take screenshots, don't do anything else. Just send me the link, or just say this is my username. All I need is your username. This is CJ Homa, mine in here, but just send me your username and I'll go in there and check it out in Replit and see if you have any issues. Sometimes I'll record a video, sometimes I'll just suggest, hey, you're missing a semicolon on line 6 or something. So this is the JavaScript, this is the CSS, and this is the HTML. I'll move this up because I don't need all that extra space in here now. So I'll make it nice and condensed. So this is all my HTML pretty much on one page here. This is my JavaScript. And this is my style.css. So that's it. That's exercise 17. If we have time, we'll try to do an exercise 18 where we do a random SpongeBob exercise. But for now, this will keep us busy in Unit 13.